that okay? Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Harold. So good afternoon. It's great to be here. To state the obvious, this conversation about how to protect workers engaged in precarious work is both more challenging and more important than ever. And I'm honored to be included on this panel of people who I so greatly admire and have had the opportunity to work with during the course of the Obama administration. And I want to start by talking a little bit about the work that we've done in the administration to protect and address precarious work, because I think it's really important to frame this conversation by making sure that we all have front of mind what we're in danger of losing as a result of this transition. And in fact, there was an editorial in the New York Times today that I think did a really good job of sort of setting that forth. And then maybe locate this discussion a little bit in the context of some bigger trends that we're seeing in the economy and in labor policy that, not surprisingly, are likely to now be accelerating, and then hopefully get to a few thoughts on the path forward. At DOL, we don't have a sort of official definition of precarious work, but we have certainly had on our minds and at the top of our policy agenda ways to address work that is unstable and insecure, that doesn't pay enough to support a family, or that lacks basic labor standard protections. So some of the things that we have done, again, that we are hoping that people in this room and everywhere will help in defending in these days and years to come, is start with the extension of overtime and minimum wage protections to 2 million home care workers. As I'm sure I don't need to tell you, this was a group that was excluded from basic protections for many, many years. We heard stories as we were working through the regulatory process of home care workers putting in as much as 120 hours of work a week without any overtime pay, and certainly lacking minimum wage rules. So 2 years ago, we promulgated a rule to finally fix that. Of course, it was the subject of litigation. We fought that litigation. And earlier this year, the Supreme Court declined to hear a challenge to that rule. So clearly, we have to make sure that home care workers continue to have that protection that we all, and with many allies here, work so hard to secure for them. We've also taken a variety of other steps to directly raise wages for a broad range of workers. We've raised the minimum wage for hundreds of thousands of people who work for federal contractors through an executive order and a DOL rule. And we've pushed for that broader minimum wage increase across the country as minimum wage legislation obviously stalled on Capitol Hill. So since early 2013, when the president really stepped in to call on states to increase the minimum wage, we've seen 18 states take action to raise their minimum wage. And in fact, as I'm sure you know, 4 states, as dismal as Election Day was, there were 4 states that did vote ballot initiatives to increase their minimum wage. As I hope everybody here knows too, we've updated the overtime regulations to bring them into the 21st century. It was a much needed rule that's currently under attack and very much needs to be defended. You know, the CBO recently found that reversing the overtime rule at this point would take overtime protection from nearly 4 million workers, would increase workers' hours, lower their wages, all without creating, even in the analysis of the CBO, without creating any jobs. And in fact, even the CBO had to admit that to roll back or to continue to block the overtime rule from going into effect would in fact increase income inequality, because the benefits of blocking that rule will accrue to the wealthiest in our nation. Of course, promulgating new standards doesn't really help workers in precarious work without strong strategic enforcement. And that's an area where the Department of Labor has really made incredible progress during this administration. David Weil, who I'm sure you all know, who leads our Wage and Hour division, literally wrote the book on the fissured workplace, which is the source of this uncertainty for a growing number of workers in our economy. David Michaels also, who leads OSHA, our Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they've really been leaders in the department in thinking about strategic enforcement, about how to make sure that our limited enforcement dollars did the most for the most workers, and especially workers who were the least likely to step up themselves and ask for help. So just to put some numbers around our efforts, since 2009, the Department of Labor has helped 1.7 million workers recover $1.6 billion in back wages under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And the effect of our work has been even broader than that, because we've really targeted industries, and our enforcement efforts have had ripple effects, not just among the companies, the employers that we've actually engaged with in our enforcement efforts, but we've really tried hard to transform industries where we knew that precarious workers were particularly at risk. And so to be clear, that $1.6 billion it's wage theft. That's money that was stolen from predominantly low-wage workers. And it's not going to end just with the end of the Obama administration. So if we see the next administration failing to make those kinds of recoveries for workers, it's because that money is being taken out of their pockets and remaining in the pockets of others. So enforcement is just an incredibly, incredibly important piece of what we've been able to accomplish. We've also worked to promote paid leave. Again, with the paralysis on Capitol Hill, most of our work in that respect has been through the bully pulpit and through grants that have supported innovations and feasibility studies in the states to try to move paid leave and paid sick leave at the state and local level. We are going to finalize paid sick leave regulation to provide 7 days of paid sick leave for the employees of government contractors before we leave in January. But before I wrap up this sort of abbreviated look at our efforts on precarious work, I do want to mention work that we've done to promote worker voice. And again, this is an area where we don't have legislative accomplishments, because that truly has not been possible in this environment. But I think this administration has made very clear the importance that we attach to workers having a voice in the workplace and the economy. Many of you here were part of the White House Summit on Worker Voice last year, or participated in one of our regional summits we did across the country. And the point of this exercise was to work on solutions and spark collaborations, especially on behalf of precarious workers. We see this very much. I think it is fair to say that we haven't had a president in generations who spoke more directly and more clearly about the value that he attaches to collective bargaining and to unions. But this effort was really very much an and conversation, not an either or an or conversation. Again, the president, Secretary Perez, have been unparalleled in speaking out in support of the labor movement, and we've put tremendous effort into supporting innovative collaborations and campaigns, also outside of the formal collective bargaining process. We've also done, we had a symposium on the future of work and really tried to focus on how changes in the economy are affecting workers, again, with David Weil leading on our work to look at and expand the conversation about the future of work, to talk about not just the gig economy, which everybody seems to like to talk about in terms of the future of work, but these changes in work relationships we see throughout the economy, the fishing of work relationships through the greater use of temporary employment, staffing agencies, increase in numbers of workers being treated as independent contractors, franchising, this layering of the levels between the brand name and the individual workers. So all of this, again, I raise this especially so we have front of mind what is at risk. And risk is really at the heart of what we've been looking at in these changes in the economy, and how risk is shifting in these changing relationships from a regime in which the government and employers really helped workers navigate risk in their economic life, to more and more risk shifting to individual workers. And so that's our work around labor standards. We're in an effort to try to calibrate that risk, and our fear that as we see, and we fear labor standards not being supported potentially in the next administration, we will see this increasing shift of risk. We've obviously seen it in the area of retirement security. The administration has tried to take steps in that direction to help workers find new ways of having a secure and dignified retirement, but we see it in training and throughout the economy. The Affordable Care Act obviously was an incredible step forward in trying to, again, recalibrate some of that risk, but as we all know, that is now in grave danger. So quickly looking at the way forward, I think in this administration we've sort of set somewhat of a foundation of looking to state and local government as a way of continuing to make progress on a progressive labor agenda, especially for precarious workers. Again, because of the paralysis in Capitol Hill, we've had to do that even as we've had the executive branch within our control. We've done this by, for example, supporting pilot programs on portable benefits at the state and local level, supporting paid leave. We're very interested in looking at what's going to happen here in DC with a potentially new paid leave program, supporting paid sick days. Again, it's very challenging when you're talking about how to support worker voice at the state and local level, at least from a regulatory or statutory perspective, but there are interesting models, and I think that's something I'm looking forward to as I leave the administration, to see the creative and innovative new policies that hopefully we will all be working on together. But again, I guess I would end just by talking about the need to really do all we can and come together to defend the progress that we have made, and then look to the state and local level as ways to continue that progress.